Matthew and Rachel Green seemed like the perfect couple with the perfect life until a missing contractor, a locked basement, and a buried slab of concrete exposed a terrifying secret beneath their dream home. Matthew and Rachel Green were the kind of couple neighbors admired from a distance. Young, successful, and always put together, they carried an air of quiet confidence. When they moved into the brand new house on Willow Creek Lane, the street seemed to brighten. Their two-story home had modern finishes, wide windows, and a perfectly trimmed lawn. Matthew, a partner in a fast-growing law firm, had chosen the property for its privacy. Rachel, a freelance writer, fell in love with the natural light and the peaceful view of the open meadow behind the house. It seemed like the ideal place to build their future. They settled in quickly. Boxes were unpacked within days, furniture arranged with care, and Rachel even began a blog titled Meadow House Life, sharing bits of home inspiration and lifestyle tips. She posted cheerful update sunset photos from their deck, recipes she tried, and glimpses of her quiet workspace with coffee mugs and notebooks scattered across the table. Neighbors waved when they passed by, and the Greens always returned. The gesture, but never stayed long for conversations. They attended one neighborhood meet and greet and politely declined further invitations, citing busy schedules. To most, they were simply private people. Nothing about them raised alarm. Rachel's posts made their life seem picture-perfect. Her blog portrayed a harmonious marriage, peaceful routines, and the comfort of starting anew. But something darker stirred beneath that surface. Small things went unnoticed. Matthew spent long hours in the basement, which he insisted on renovating himself. The door was always locked, even from the inside. When Rachel mentioned it to friends, she joked that it was his man cave project. But she never went down there, not after the first few weeks. She told herself it was better that way. Rachel's behavior began to subtly shift. Her tone in blog posts became more detached. She shared fewer pictures. Her updates became irregular. She started sleeping in the guest room, but she never talked about why. In public, she smiled less, spoke softer, and avoided direct eye contact. The change was slow, almost imperceptible to those who only saw the surface. Meanwhile, Matthew thrived. He took on more clients, talked about expansion, and hired a private contractor to reinforce the basement's foundation, something he told the contractor was for flood safety. He paid in cash and insisted on working alongside him every day. The contractor never returned after the job was done, and no one thought to ask why. By the end of the summer, Rachel stopped posting entirely. Her social media went silent. Her email auto-replied with taking a break to recharge, and her phone went straight to voicemail. Neighbors assumed the couple was vacationing or simply enjoying their privacy. The house remained quiet. Loud noises, no visitors, no disturbances. But one day, a landscaper named Tony Delgado showed up for a routine sprinkler installation. It seemed like just another home improvement project. He was given access to the backyard and began his work. Under the bright sun, what he found buried under the garden bed would be the first clue that the Greens' dream home was hiding something horrifying underneath. Tony Delgado arrived at the Green residence on a mild September morning, ready to install a new sprinkler system across the backyard. It was supposed to be a 2-day job, straightforward, routine, and well within his experience. He'd been hired by Matthew through a referral and was told to come in through the side gate. When Tony arrived, only Rachel was home. She looked pale and tired, barely meeting his eyes as she mumbled a greeting and disappeared back inside. He shrugged it off and got to work. The first day passed without issue. Tony laid out the piping, measured the yard, and marked the areas for digging. The soil was soft and easy to turn over until he hit something solid under a patch of fresh flower beds near the back fence. At first, he thought it was a rock or buried debris. But when he scraped away the dirt, he uncovered a flat slab of concrete. It was smooth, recently poured, and out of place in an otherwise untouched area. It was no more than 6 feet long, 2 feet wide, and only a few inches below the surface. It wasn't part of any landscaping plan. Curious, Tony tapped the concrete with his shovel. It didn't sound hollow, but it seemed rushed and uneven. He figured he'd ask about it the next day. That evening, he told his brother about the strange. Fine during a phone call. Just feels off, he said. Like it's covering something up. The next morning, Tony didn't return to the job. His truck was discovered that evening, abandoned near a service road 2 miles from the green home. The keys were missing, the driver's seat was pushed back, and the doors were left unlocked. There was no sign of a struggle, no personal belongings missing, and no calls or texts from Tony after he left home the previous night. His wallet and phone were never recovered. His family reported him missing the next morning, launching a quiet search that quickly turned up nothing. Police questioned the Greens later that week. Rachel said she hadn't seen Tony since the first day of work. Matthew claimed Tony left early after mentioning a family emergency. They seemed concerned, cooperative, and calm. Their story lined up. Without any direct evidence, the police had no reason to search the house. It was added to Tony's case file, but no further action was taken. Meanwhile, Rachel grew quieter. Neighbors noticed she no longer walked her dog or picked up mail in person. She stopped answering texts. Grocery deliveries were left untouched for hours on the porch. One neighbor, an older woman from 3 doors down, mentioned seeing Rachel staring out of the upstairs window late at night, unmoving, expressionless dot inside the house. Rachel had begun locking herself in the guest bedroom. She stopped eating meals with Matthew and slept with the lights on. She tried to ignore the basement door, the quiet hum of the generator, the metallic smell in the air, and the sound she was convinced she heard. Slow, dragging footsteps behind. The steel door. She didn't know what was beneath the concrete slab Tony had uncovered. But she knew, deep down, that he wasn't the first to ask about it. Rachel's sister, Amanda, hadn't heard from her in weeks. At first, she assumed Rachel was busy, caught up in writing or life at home. But as the days passed with no replies to texts or emails, a quiet sense of dread began to grow. The last message Rachel had sent was strange, just a photo of the backyard from the upstairs window with no caption. It was blurry, almost rushed, and the corner of a concrete slab was just visible beneath the rose bushes. Amanda couldn't explain why, but the image stuck in her mind. After another week of silence, she made the decision to drive out to Willow Creek Lane. When Amanda arrived, the house looked normal. The lawn was still trimmed, the porch clean, and the mailbox empty. But no one answered the door. She knocked several times, then circled around the back. The curtains were drawn. The flower beds had wilted. There was no movement inside. Amanda contacted the local police to request a wellness check, explaining her sister's sudden silence and unusual message. Officers arrived within an hour. They knocked, announced themselves, and eventually gained entry using a spare key Amanda provided. The interior of the house was eerily silent. Everything appeared clean and orderly, almost too clean. The living room was untouched, the kitchen spotless, and Rachel's writing desk perfectly arranged. Her laptop was open, but frozen on a blank document. Upstairs, the master bedroom was neatly made. The guest room was messy, with discarded clothes on the floor and a light still on. Amanda followed closely behind, calling Rachel's name, but there was no answer. The basement door was locked. One of the officers noticed faint scratch marks around the doorknob. The hinges had been reinforced and the handle replaced with a coded lock. Amanda confirmed Rachel had once mentioned Matthew working on the basement, but never said much else. The officers contacted their supervisor and secured a warrant to return the following morning. The next day, with the warrant in hand, they returned and forced the basement door open. What they discovered was deeply unsettling. The staircase led down to a cold, windowless space with concrete walls. A single hanging bulb lit the room. Soundproof padding lined one side, and there were cameras installed at odd angles. In the far corner, a heavy shelving unit concealed a second door, this one metallic, with no handle on the outside and a keypad lock. Once opened, it revealed a hidden chamber. The room inside was colder, darker. Black acoustic foam covered the walls. There was a surgical table with restraints, stained and rusted. A drain sat in the center of the floor. A cabinet held various tools, none of them for home repair. A large metal box near the wall contained personal items, a driver's license, watch, and keychain belonging to Tony Delgado. Alongside them were other items. 5 wallets, all from different men, reported missing over the past year. The house on Willow Creek Lane was no longer a quiet suburban home. It was now the center of an unfolding nightmare. Rachel was gone. Matthew was missing. And beneath their perfect home, police had just uncovered a torture room. Rachel was found 3 days later in a roadside motel just outside of Omaha. The front desk clerk called the police after hearing frantic cries coming from one of the rooms in the early hours of the morning. When officers entered, they found Rachel sitting on the floor, shaking and disheveled. Her clothes were wrinkled, her hair unkempt, and she was gripping a leather-bound journal so tightly her knuckles had gone white. She didn't resist when they took her into custody. In fact, she seemed relieved at the police station. Rachel barely spoke. Her eyes remained distant, like she wasn't fully present. It wasn't until they placed the journal in front of her and asked what it was that she began to talk. The journal was filled with entries dating back more than a year, each one documenting her descent into a nightmare she claimed she couldn't escape. Her handwriting varied, some neat and clear, others erratic, scrawled in a frenzy. Every word pointed to one thing. Matthew had built a chamber. Matthew had lured the victims. And Matthew had killed them. But Rachel's entries also told another story. One where she slowly became involved, not through force, but through silence. At first, she had discovered Matthew's plans and confronted him. She begged him to stop. He promised it would just be a phase, that it wouldn't go too far. She believed him. When the first victim disappeared, she pretended it wasn't real. She convinced herself it had nothing to do with their home. But then came another, and another. And eventually, she stopped pretending. According to the journal, Rachel helped clean the chamber. She bought supplies. She deleted evidence. She kept quiet. Her entries weren't just a confession. They were a chronicle of her transformation. The woman who once wrote about homemade candles and cozy reading nooks had become someone else entirely. One entry read, "There's a version of me that would have run. I bury her with the first one." She never came back. Detectives cross-checked her writings with missing persons reports. The names matched. The dates lined up. The entries referenced details only the killer could know. While Rachel claimed she had never participated in the murders themselves, the evidence painted a blurrier picture. Her fingerprints were found on the lock to the chamber. Her DNA was on the restraints. She had helped cover up the deaths, even if she hadn't caused them directly. During questioning, Rachel finally spoke. Her voice was thin, fragile, as if it might snap under the weight of the truth. She said she feared Matthew, that he had manipulated her, threatened her, convinced her there was no way out. But she also admitted that, in time, fear turned into numbness. She stopped hoping he'd stop. She stopped hoping someone would find out. She just waited. Rachel was charged with multiple counts of accessory to murder and obstruction. As the investigation continued, the focus shifted to finding Matthew. He had vanished without a trace. But based on Rachel's final journal entry, he said the house wasn't the end. He was building something bigger. "I think he's already started." Detectives feared that wherever he had gone, he might be preparing to do it all again. Matthew Green's disappearance ignited a nationwide manhunt. His photo was circulated across media platforms, his name added to the FBI's most wanted list. But no matter how far they searched, there was no sign of him. It was as though he had vanished into thin air. Investigators believed he had planned his escape long before the discovery of the chamber. Months prior, he had quietly withdrawn large sums of cash, sold off cryptocurrency assets, and routed money through offshore accounts. His law firm hadn't seen him for weeks. One associate claimed Matthew had taken a sabbatical to reconnect with nature. That was the last anyone had heard from him. In the weeks that followed, authorities uncovered a disturbing amount of evidence hidden inside the Green home. Beneath floorboards, inside the attic, even buried in the backyard. A second set of hard drives revealed hundreds of hours of surveillance footage. Victims were filmed inside the chamber, some for days, before the footage abruptly cut off. It became evident Matthew hadn't acted on impulse. His crimes were methodical, rehearsed, and deeply rooted in control. Rachel remained in custody. During psychiatric evaluation, she showed signs of trauma, guilt, and emotional collapse, but experts were divided on whether she was a victim or a participant. Some saw her as a manipulated woman, groomed into silence. Others believed she had made a choice, maybe not to kill, but to stay. She was eventually offered a plea deal in exchange for cooperation, agreeing to testify fully against Matthew if he were ever caught. Until then, she would serve a 25-year sentence in a medium-security prison, far from the life she once curated online. 6 months after the discovery, the house on Willow Creek Lane was seized by the state. No one wanted it. Realtors tried to market it as a fixer-upper with potential, but the address was already infamous. News crews had filmed the basement. Podcasts retold the story. True crime forums dissected every detail. Curious onlookers began sneaking onto the property, trying to peek through the boarded windows. It was no longer a home. It was a monument to something evil. Then came the letters. 3 separate families across different states received handwritten notes, all postmarked from different cities. Each note included a phrase used in Rachel's journal, phrases no one outside law enforcement had seen. One note read, "She watched the roses bloom, but never questioned the soil." Another said, "The basement was only practice." Inside, one envelope was a photo, blurry, low resolution, showing what looked like another hidden room, this time with white tiled walls and a surgical lamp hanging from the ceiling. There were no fingerprints, no DNA. Only one thing was clear: Matthew was still out there. Investigators now believed he was creating a new space, likely under a false identity. He could be anywhere. Authorities urged the public to report any suspicious activity, especially involving construction projects or unusually isolated renovations. But as time passed, no leads came in. The trail had gone cold. From the outside, Willow Creek Lane had returned to silence. Grass grew long again. The roses withered. The for sale sign faded under the sun. But behind its boarded windows, the memory of what had happened there still lingered. What began as a dream home had become a death chamber, and the man who created it had disappeared into the world, waiting, watching, perhaps planning the next house no one would ever want to live in.